Oh, greetings, my relatives. Welcome to another program, Eagle and Condor. This is Tony Gonzales, your host today, and hopefully it's May 5, Cinco de Mayo, and it's a great day across the Southwest in particular with the Mexican American, Chicano peoples who, as well as Mexico, but more so in the United States, the Southwest celebrate Cinco de Mayo. It was a great victory, a battle of the Mexican peoples. They fought the French in Puebla, 1862. That day continues to be celebrated more so up here in North America. Of course, the French came back the second time around to another battle in Puebla, and of which they were victorious. But eventually, they were kicked out, and thanks to the United States supporting the Mexican people's position for their right to self-determination. But indeed, my relatives, today, Cinco de Mayo, here on Eagle and Condor, I've invited a special guest, of which you'll see the interview, and that is with Nilo Cayuqueo. He's from Argentina. He's Mapuche, Indio, and he's got a long history of activism. You just got to hear him out, that all he's done, including being a part of the international Indian movement, if you will, with the work that he's done in the international arena, particularly at the United Nations. So he's going to give us a good background understanding of the involvement of Indian peoples at the UN. A little background about himself. He lived here in the Bay Area in the early 80s for some time, and he had a particular newsletter called SAIC, that's Central South America Information Bureau. And well, we'll let him explain, and we'll try and have a part two to his knowledge and understanding of the details within the United Nations. And we'll be talking also about the Declaration on the Rights of Indian Peoples, which is a major achievement of Indian peoples in the international and the UN arena, which was adopted by the General Assembly in September of 2007, my relatives. And right after our interview, we're going to go into a current video of the 23rd session of the United Nations Permanent Forum on Indigenous Peoples, which was underway April 15th through April the 26th. And that interview, it will be the 9th session of this UN Permanent Forum meeting. And I believe we'll have Nilo Cayuqueo in it, delivering an intervention, and another friend and colleague who many of you might recall having seen him on Eagle and Condor in the past. That's Matsatsin Acosta. Matsatsin is also doing an interview in this interview, the 9th session, the Permanent Forum. But before we get into all of this, my relatives, I just want to tell you that Leonard Peltier, still in prison, going on 49 years. He has a parole hearing June the 10th of this year, 2024. And so I call on you once again, call the White House, leave a message with President Joe Biden, executive clemency or a compassionate release immediately for our friend, our brother, he's also a grandfather and elderly. He's in need of medical attention, my relatives. He needs to come home. It's unjust, travesty that he's been locked up when he should have been released a long time ago. He's being accused of a crime he did not commit on July, or was it June 26, 1975, in a shootout at the Jumping Bull compound in South Dakota. So call the White House, area code 202-456-1111. It's 456-1111, my relatives. And also just a quick reminder that the Peace and Dignity Journeys is underway. This is a run every 4 years undertaken by committed people, volunteers. And this year it began May the 1st from the north at Fairbanks, Alaska. And the runners, walkers will take 5-6 months to get to the South America, to Colombia around November the 28th. And people are organized and are leaving from South America, from Tierra del Fuego, down south, Argentina and Chile, where they meet. And they're going to be running all the way across South America to Colombia and arrive on that day also, November 28th. So you can find out more about them, how you can help at the Peace and Dignity Journeys.com, or just Peace and Dignity Journeys, and it'll pop up. And also for Leonard Peltier, free LeonardPeltierNow.org. So with that, and let's get ready for this program, my relatives, with Nilo Cayuqueo. Oh, my relatives here on Eagle and Condor, I've invited Nilo Cayuqueo to join us today. We are going to be talking about the international indigenous movement, if you will, Indian peoples at the United Nations. And Nilo Cayuqueo has a long history of involvement in the international arena and at the United Nations. I believe he was there in 1977 at the first International Conference of Indians of the world. And Nilo also is a Bay Area resident. He was here for several years in the 70s, 80s. He'll tell us about that. But Nilo Cayuqueo, Argentina, from Argentina, Mapuche man. I've invited you to talk to us a little bit more about the history of Indian peoples at the United Nations. In our last program, we put together a program that included insights to the United Nations with the first session of the 23rd meeting session of the Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues that was held in New York City from April 15th through April 26th. And the last program we did, we included the first session, the opening session of the Permanent Forum on April 15th, and we attached a video called Indians in Geneva. And with that, welcome to Eagle and Condor, Nilo Cayuqueo. If you can also introduce yourself.
Okay, Tony, thank you very much for inviting me. I want to send a greeting all of you, my brothers and sisters in the Bay Area, especially all the indigenous brothers and sisters of the United States and all over the world. Thank you for inviting me. Yeah, I'm very humble and proud to be here with you talking. After a long time, I used to live in the Bay Area, but now I live in Argentina with my people. I moved back there in 2006. Yeah. Well, I grew, I live for a small community in Argentina, southwestern, and called Los Toldos. I grew up there, in the countryside with my great uncle was my teacher. He was my mentor, and he was the chief of the community. And I learned a lot from him. So, after I was young, got involved with indigenous movement in Argentina and in my community, and then internationally. So this is a long history of the movement and long story of myself, because I've been, all over the world. And for some reason, I didn't intend to, I didn't plan to go anywhere outside of my area. But what happened is 1977, there was the first conference on indigenous people in Geneva and United Nations, and they invited us. It was a time when we had dictatorship in Argentina, military dictatorship, and so we went there anyway to Geneva to participate. It was a conference organized by the NGOs and also the participation of the International Indian Treaty Council. So, which was formed, I think, in 1973, Wounded Knee. Well, Tony, you know more than me about the history of the indigenous movement in North America. So, after being in Geneva and participating in the conference in 1977, I returned to Argentina, but, and my friend, my brothers and sisters told me in the community and the organization, watch out because there is a report that you went to Geneva to talk about bad thing about government. And so I was threatened by the ambassador of Argentina in Geneva after I spoke, telling me that there was a international coalition against the country, communism involved to disqualify the country, to talk about bad thing about the military government. He was kind of saying that if asking me if I was part of that movement against Argentina, I said, no, I am in the indigenous movement. But nevertheless, when I came back to Argentina, they were looking for me. So I was kind of hiding one side to the other. Finally, in 1979, I was able to get out of the country with the support with the Danish embassy in Buenos Aires. People that I from the Danish embassy and from the International Work Group for Indigenous Affairs in Copenhagen, and they were following what the development of the repression in Argentina, and they were calling me every week to telling me if you're going to go out of the country. I said, no, I want to stay here with my people. And then finally they said, well, no, you have to go out because you are in danger. They can kill you any minute. So finally accepted. They offered me to have asylum in Copenhagen, in Denmark. But I said, no, I don't want to go to Europe. I want to stay in South America somewhere. So I decided to go to Peru, which is a very poor country. I lived there for a year and a half, almost, a year and 8 months. But the situation in Peru was bad as usual. It's a poor country, and so I didn't have, I wasn't starving, but I didn't have so much money to survive. Anyway, I survived. Was okay. I learned a lot with indigenous organization. Because in Geneva, we met with different organizations of indigenous people from South America. We decided to have some kind of coordination among indigenous people in the South, because there was a very sad time in those years because there were dictatorships all over South America, in Paraguay, Argentina, Bolivia, Peru, Chile. It was terrible where many people were killed. And so in Argentina, for example, we have 30,000 people who have been killed or disappeared, tortured, not only indigenous people, but all kind of people, young people, especially who want to do some change of the injustice or the capitalism. So it was very sad. Anyway, I was in Peru for a year and a year and a half, and then we went to Bolivia. They kicked me out from Bolivia too because there was a military coup over there. There was a military drug traffickers, and they took over. So we had to escape from Bolivia. We went back to Peru, and then they kicked me out from there too. So I didn't have place to go. I went to the second conference, 1981. It was the second conference on indigenous people and the land in Geneva. I went there, but I couldn't come back to even Peru, Bolivia, or Argentina. So I stayed in Paris or in France for all 11 months. I was trying to go back to South America, to Mexico, somewhere, and they couldn't. It was complicated. And I spoke with some people in San Francisco Bay Area. There was a support group which is I think it still exists. It was called Guatemala News and Information Bureau in the Bay Area in Oakland. I talked to them on the phone. It was a kind of funny because the people who were in exile in Paris, they invented a trick. They were putting a coin of franc in the public phone with the thread. Where they put in the coin and taking it away and putting back, and you can keep talking for hours. It was so then the French government
Right.
realized that they were cheated and they changed the system, right? They will avoid they put the 5 franc, and so they were more controlled. But from that time, I had the opportunity to speak with many people around the world, to United States, or my family, and Peru, whatever. So finally,
Well,
eh,
in Peru, the Sendero Luminoso was going on también. There was a
exactly,
lot of
19, when I
problems.
was exactly
Yeah,
1980. It
please
was
go
a
ahead.
very bad situation in Peru with the guerrilla movement. It was growing up. It's called Shining Path,
Yes,
Sendero Luminoso in Spanish. Um, they started to kill many people too, and they were fighting with the military. And the indigenous people got in the crossfire, the people from the Andean region. And they think about
yes.
between 80 and 100,000 people were killed in Peru those years, but it's
Mm-hmm.
mostly from the military. So by that time, I left Peru because the government kicked me out. So I went to Europe. Um, but and then when I called to the people in San Francisco Bay Area, asked them if I could go there. They offered me, say, yeah, you can come here if you want. And there's a place for you to stay. There's a lady who says she can, put you in her place. And I did. I went to funny. I went to the U.S. Embassy in Paris. I said, I need to go back to Peru, to Lima, where I live, because I showed the ticket. I had one round trip, 1 year ticket, and say I had to go back there, but I need to stop in New York to a conference. In that time, I was a member of the World Council of Indigenous People, an organization that was founded by the indigenous people of Canada with other people from Mexico, different countries. I was member of that, and we had a kind of pass of as an NGO of the United Nations. I saw that I had to go to New York to a meeting, and they said, well, okay, so how much time do you need in New York? I said, 3 days. And he said, yeah, I give you 2 weeks, and then you can go to visit New York, and then you go back to Lima, Peru, where you live. I say, okay, thank you, thank you. In that time, it wasn't yet the so-called terrorism, It was like not too complicated to get visa, and I got the visa. I got the plane in Paris to New York, and then I changed the plane to Oakland. I didn't go to
Yeah.
Lima.
And 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 Nilo, by the way, you mentioned the World Council of Indigenous Peoples, WCIP, which
Exactly,
was the first indigenous organization to acquire non-governmental status at the
exactly,
United Nations,
exactly.
and then
And it was
the International Indian Treaty Council. But just for our audience, our listeners, the video people,
exactly. What
viewers to
happened is
know.
that there was a great man from the so-called British Columbia in Vancouver, and in the so-called British Columbia, not Vancouver, the island where the Shuswap people live. They formed together with other people from the east an organization called National Indian Brotherhood. It was in 1969, I think, or in the early 70s. Um, After we formed the World Council of Indigenous People in Port Alberni in 1975 in Canada, and this close to the so-called British Columbia, um, the National Indian Brotherhood, as a gesture, extend the status of NGO at the United Nations to the World Council of Indigenous People. They passed the status to the World Council of Indigenous People. It was a very
I
good
see.
solidarity. And then we started to work as an NGO at the UN. So that way I show the credential that I have. Had a pass for 1 year, and it was easy to get visa to United States in those years. And I came to the Bay Area, to Oakland, and I was staying with the lady. I met with the people of, there was the people from the Intertribal Friendship House in those years. The people from the University of Berkeley. There was a woman called Susan Lobo. She was an anthropologist from UC Berkeley, and she introduced me to the people of Intertribal Friendship House in Oakland, in East 14. So we went there. We were talking to people with the idea to form an organization, the information center, to support the indigenous people in the South, but also to try to exchange information to people on the South and the North, because there was a kind of idea, there was the history or legend, I don't know how you call it, but the people in the South and Mexico, they said there was a time when the eagle from the north and the condor from the side, they will unite, come together. Like I can see the picture now you have in the back. They say they found in Mexico somewhere a drawing from many years ago, hundreds of years. They don't know how old they are. And there's a drawing showing that there's an eagle on the contour together with neck, connected. So we start with the process of that, trying to unite indigenous people in the south and the north, even though we spoke a different language, we speak our language, but also Spanish, and the North American Indians spoke English and the language too. So, but anyway, this was good idea, and we started to work together. So the conference in 1977, but prior to the conference in 1977, it was another conference sponsored by the Sami people in Kiruna in Sweden, 1977, just 2 months, 1 month before the conference in Geneva. And we had a second World Conference of Indigenous People in Sweden, in
I
Kiruna.
see.
And some people we went to Geneva to participate in the conference in 1977, when they all, I met all the brothers from North America and sisters, they were like Philip Deere and Bill Mean, Russell Mean, Clay Bellacour, Vernon Bellacour, and all the
Bill
six.
Wapapa,
Sorry?
Bill Wapapa.
Bill Wapapa was there. The great Bill Wapapa. Later we became good friends, and we did a lot of work together in the Bay Area, because I
Yes.
in Oakland, he lived in Oakland too. And we organized events in not only in travel, but also all over the Bay Area. In 1991, we organized together a big conference in the Lenin College about indigenous 500 years of resistance of indigenous people. We had like 200 people in the Lenin College. I say Lenin College, right? In
Yes,
Oakland?
Laney College. Yes. No,
Yeah. We have a big conference about the 500 years of European invasion and indigenous resistance. And then we organized a conference in Quito, Ecuador, 1992, about the 500 years of resistance,
good. Yeah,
where
you
many
were there.
people from North America came to visit us. It was Winona LaDuke, Stanley McLeod, Deborah Harry, and a bunch of other people, from there were like almost 50 indigenous people and 20 indigenous supporters. The non-Indian people who were allied and supporting us. They came to Quito to the big conference about indigenous people. So it was a great time. When we were trying to unite the people of the South and the North, but also to engage in political work, to make alliance. And it was a great time. And I'm kind of disappointed now. This day, that kind of thing doesn't happen anymore. We don't. In those years, we didn't have the technology that people have today. We don't have cell phone. We didn't have telephone, nothing. Later, it was in the 90s when we started to use the fax. to send documents. It wasn't the advanced technology, but still, but even though we have a lot of work together and we connect each other on the phone or send the newsletter. I remember we formed an intertribal friendship house with the support a bulletin about indigenous people. We print the bulletin in English and Spanish, and we send to North America and to Europe and to indigenous people in Central and South America. And the people in the South, they thought that we were in a big organization. They thought because we publish this magazine, all over. We were like 6, 7, 8 people, not more than that, working. But we're working hard to connect
Yes.
people. A lot of human rights connection meeting in 1992. You remember when we organized a bunch of meetings together with you too in the Bay Area, right?
Yes.
Was in Santa Cruz and David DQ University. It was an historical
Exactly.
college, which I understand doesn't exist anymore, right?
Well, it's operating like on one leg, but it's there.
Yeah.
It's still there.
Yeah, I remember that Dennis Bank was there leading the college and the DQ University in Davis. So we went. I remember we went to the treaty conference in Minnesota. I think it was. We went to Guapapa driving over there with crazy idea. We will roll like 3 or 4 days together. Billy has an old car. We broke in the middle of the way two times. We
Yeah.
were like 4 or 5 cars together. All the cars have problems because they were
Yeah.
all cars, no? Nobody has a brand new car.
Yeah.
So took a long time to get there and come back too because
You
when,
go, you get
when we
there,
get back.
you go on a prayer. You go on a prayer.
Exactly. Yeah. Hopefully, cross your finger that the car will be okay. When we came back from Minnesota, we stopped on the Philip Deere place in Oklahoma. He invited us for a ceremony there. It was great. Philip Deere was in 1977. He was a Musqueam. I don't know, remember the name of the people. Musqueam people.
Muskogee Creek.
Muscovy Creek, yeah. Philip Deere. He was a great leader. He was a great speaker too. He spoke
Yes,
at
indeed.
the UN in 1977. He was a great, great speaker. I think he's no longer with us. But so today, to me, when I see the people here, they're looking for scholarship, some work, and I don't know, feel some kind of sad because it wasn't the idea. The idea is to have a strong organization to strengthen the community, the grassroots people, and come together and fight. So there's no happen very much, but still people, young people, there's
Well,
a hope they can.
you laid a lot of the groundwork. As the viewers are listening to you and how you explain the movement and yourself as a human rights advocate, human rights fighter, even for your people. You had to leave Argentina under threat. You traveled all over. You came to the Bay Area. All these conferences, were very valuable. It set the stage where indeed we are today. But Nilo, I wanted to just move a little fast forward back to the UN. And did you attend the working group on Indian populations? Remember Madam Dias, who was the chair at that time? I think the first working group was 1983, I believe. I started going myself 1984, but you were going to the working group also. Tell us a little bit about that, because the culmination of 1983 at the working group becomes a permanent forum, and then we have today the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indian People. So please, if you can share some experiences of the 80s at the UN.
Yeah, exactly. We never trust the United Nations because we know that they are the colonial government who were and they are today oppressing us. because we are living in the colonial country. You know, the indigenous people, we don't have so much power there in the decision-making process. However, there were some nice, good people working in the United Nations, you know, people who were technical or political assistant at the government. There was a great man called Augusto Williamson Diaz. He was from
Oh,
Guatemala. Yeah, and Augusto, he was at the 80 already. And
yeah, he
he
was
was
a scholar, a scholar.
late,
Yes,
late 70 and then 80, and he was a smart man, and he was proposing during the 77. One day he said, you know what thing we are thinking to set up a working group that you guys can come every year to United Nations and discuss, propose to United Nations to change, to set up a policy on indigenous people. He said, that's a great idea. He said, well, we can try to find money from volunteer governments who want to put some money, or foundation, or NGO, whoever, or regular people, and we can invite you every year. We proposed in 1977.
yeah,
Uh, yeah, in 1981 it was accepted finally. We the working group was organized, set it up in 1983. I think.
yes, yes.
Yeah,
And Nilo, if I can interject there, just in that moment, you're mentioning Augusto Williamson Diaz of Guatemala, working there in Geneva, a scholar, very smart man, as you said. He was a visionary as well. Yeah, and he was in his older years, as you say, 70s, 80 years old, but he worked very
yeah,
close with uh, Martinez Cobo,
yeah.
because
Well,
it was
Martinez Cove,
Martinez
exactly. Martinez,
Cobo was the special rapporteur designated by the United Nations. He was from Ecuador, and he
exactly.
began the study. He began the study on indigenous populations of the Americas. But just for people to know that, and people, if they want to do some research, can go into the UN and look at the Cobo report as it's referred to.
Yeah,
But,
yeah.
please go ahead.
Well, they said a cover report, but it was Augusto Williamson Diaz who wrote all the report,
Yes,
because
and
Martinez
indeed,
Cove, he didn't have any business. He didn't understand very well. He was the ambassador of Ecuador at the United Nations, but luckily he hired Augusto Williamson Diaz to work with him, because Augusto was studying the Maya people, all the people in South Central America and Guatemala. And he was a
yeah,
smart visionary, I should say. And also, he was the idea, or we proposed with some people from the South to talking about the treaty that the government of the United States and Chile and Argentina too, we have with the Spanish, also with the colonizer, to start to talk about the treaties that the government set it up with indigenous people. And finally, I think it was 1987 or 88, that the Miguel Alfonso Martinez, an expert on indigenous issues from Cuba, he was appointed to be the rapporteur on the treaty of indigenous people between the governments, and there's a good report that the young people don't know about that.
yes.
Unfortunately, he did a good report, and we helped him to give information. He came to Chile, he was in Argentina, and he was a great man too, you know. In those
Oh
years,
yes.
that, yeah, we
Oh yeah,
remember very well.
And Miguel Alfonso Martinez, Dr. Miguel Alfonso Martinez, he also on that treaty study traveled throughout the United States as well, and
I,
trying to focus on particular treaties with a lot of emphasis. Yes, indeed, and he passed away maybe 10 years ago now. But please
yeah.
go ahead, Nilo.
That's a was a great thing to appoint Miguel Alfonso Martinez, who did a great job, a good report that is available, I think, in the website. And the young people must read that
Yes.
report, the conference resolution for 1977, 1981, 1980. There was the Fort Russell Tribune in Rotterdam,
Oh yes.
Holland. Yeah, where the Russell Tribune was to honor. Bertrand Russell, who was a philosopher, a human rights advocate from England, I think. And he and other people from like Jean-Paul Sartre from France, they decided to form this tribunal. And in 1980 was in Rotterdam. And we went there. I was living in Peru at that time, and we went with several indigenous people from the Andean region, Bolivia, the some people who are not here no longer with us, like Julio Tumilia Pasa and other people, Reinaga, who went there to participate in that conference in 1980. Was great. Has a lot of report on the violation of indigenous people's rights. And there's a good report if you people can go to the Russell Tribune, Rotterdam, 1980. There's a lot of information about the resolution, about the cases of violation of human rights. We present several cases of violation of indigenous rights in South America. So there's a lot of history of movement of fight on human rights issue that unfortunately we are not talking about the thing today very much. So right now, as I told you, I'm writing a book about I don't say the indigenous, the history of indigenous people, because to me it's too arrogant to say this is the history of indigenous people. Here you have no. I say we are writing the book about my memories. In my memory, talk about the situation of indigenous people in South and Central America where I visit. When I was working in SAIC in California, with the support of the intertribal and other indigenous people, and you guys, I travel a lot and I witnessed it. The movement, the growing movement of indigenous people in Guatemala and Mexico and Colombia, Ecuador, work together with them. So I'm writing about the history of the movement from my perspective, right? So
Yes.
because witnesses all this movement growing up and very strong, because what happened in South Central America, it was a time when the left it was very strong, and the campesino movement, the people who were peasants and working on the field, and the left wing with a vision, I would say, wrong. Yeah, they were wrong. They were thinking more like European Marxists, how the Indian can become Marxist and to fight on the class struggle and build the socialist.
Yeah,
Well,
it evolved.
yeah,
It evolved.
yeah, when we say, yeah, it's okay, we can build a socialism, but we are indigenous nation. It's say, well, no, you guys, that's no problem. We can solve the problem after we make the revolution. And you say, no, we can think now, because they didn't understand the indigenous people identity, the right of self-determination, even autonomy. They didn't want to have us to have autonomy. So it was a big struggle with them to work out in 1989, 90, when we started the 500 years. We changed the scene a little bit. Some people start to understand the struggle of indigenous people for
Yeah,
self-determination as indigenous nation, as a
right.
different people from the colonizer,
Yeah,
And
no,
also we proposing to build an alliance with the poor people, with the campesino come together, to build a movement of the indigenous people and campesino. The campesino are mixed blood anyway. They are not white people, the campesino are mixed blood people, indigenous people, and the Spanish. What happened also when the Spanish came, they came without women, and they were raping our sisters, and the way they had mestizo,
yeah,
they
no,
mixed blood. The
that's
same
a
thing
part.
happened all over the
That's a
country.
part of the history, Nilo, and I'm sure you're going to include that in your book. I hope your book is
Exactly.
comes up. We only just have just less than a minute to go, but you laid out some good history. And just to back up on that Martinez Cobo report that Augusto Williamson Diaz helped write up, it's a blueprint today because it includes that we should have a declaration of Indigenous Day, Indigenous Peoples Day, that we should have a declaration, and it included that we should have a convention on the rights of Indigenous people. There's an evolution to all of that, Nilo. And today, fast forward in the short time we do have, you're at the United Nations 23rd session of the permanent forum. And how long are you there? You're going to come back. We're going to have to do another interview, Nilo.
Sure.
You know, when you come back
Okay.
to the Bay Area, you're in New York.
That'd be great. Sure. I'll be for 10 days to see my daughters in the Bay Area, and maybe we can talk.
The third meeting of the 23rd session of the Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues is called to order. Distinguished forum members, distinguished observers and friends, ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters. In accordance with our program of work, the forum will continue this afternoon with its consideration of Agenda Item 5D, Human Rights Dialogue with the Special Rapporteurs on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples and the Expert Mechanism on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, Annual Review of Progress on the implementation of the General Recommendation number 39 of 2022. We will have a general discussion on this item and hear from the speaker scribed on the list of speakers for the item. Before we proceed further, however, I would kindly inform all participants that this list of speakers is closed. Speakers are reminded to raise their hand when the floor is given to them and press your mic in order to allow the sound engineers to locate you and turn on your mic. The speakers are reminded to observe the time limited of 3 minutes, and to watch for then the red light on their mic beginning to flash after 2 minutes as a signal to conclude their remark. Speakers are once again requested to deliver their statement at a reasonable speed so that the interpreters can keep translated on what they're saying. Participants who could not take the floor of their statement to the Secretariat through the email address statements@un.org. This email address is also pasted on the wall for ease of reference. In my left there. Je donne la parole à
I now give the floor to Australia.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and it is a great honour to speak to you today as an Indigenous Australian and as a representative of the Australian Government. Australia commends the Committee on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women for addressing specific challenges faced by Indigenous women and girls and for approaching these issues with an intersectional lens. Australia recognises the pivotal leadership roles Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women and girls play in their families, communities and in public, and their important contributions to the fabric of Australian society. The Nilo Cayuqueo Institute for First Nations Gender, Justice and Equality was recently launched in March 2024. With the launch of the Institute, we're not just addressing issues, we're investing in the strength, wisdom and leadership of First Nations women and girls. This Institute is a testament to our belief in the power of First Nations women to lead change. The Institute arose from the 2020 Nilo Cayuqueo report, delivered by the former Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Social Justice Commissioner and the new chair of the Institute, Ms. June Oscar. The report is a groundbreaking endeavour which elevates the voices of First Nations women and girls and is based on the most extensive consultations with First Nations women and girls Australia has ever seen. It illustrated the ongoing structural marginalisation and discrimination experienced by First Nations women and girls across issues, including housing, health, education, economic development and the environment, and it captures their self-determined strengths, challenges and aspirations which will lay the foundations of the Institute's work. Madam Chair, the Australian Government's National Plan to End Violence Against Women and Children 2022 to 2032 recognises that breaking the cycle of violence requires community-driven, trauma-informed approaches that prioritise cultural healing, family restoration, and the strength of Indigenous families and communities. It includes the first dedicated Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander action plan to address violence against First Nations women and children, launched in 2023. This is a significant step forward, acknowledging the disproportionate violence our women and children face. The action plan is designed to be culturally informed, to address the current needs of the community, and to lay a strong foundation for long-term change for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. Australia remains committed to the advancement of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women and girls in society, but we know that inequalities still exist, and we will ensure that they remain at the forefront of conversations to progress strengths-based, culturally appropriate programs and initiatives that empower Indigenous women and girls. Thank you, Madam Chair.
I thank you for your statement. I now give the floor to the Indigenous Peoples Council of Canada.
Thank you, Chair, for giving me the floor. It pains me deeply to speak on behalf of the Indigenous women and girls in the Chittagong Hill Tracts, known as CHT, who continues to suffer injustice and violence in Bangladesh, despite the promises made by the government and the international community. The situation remains dire for these vulnerable members of our society. They endured targeted violence by settlers, with many cases reported in 2023 alone. Unfortunately, justice is often denied to these victims due to their Indigenous status. In April 2024, 54 innocent Bam Indigenous individuals, including pregnant women, were unjustly arrested by the military. Similarly, in March 2024, 6 Indigenous Moro women and girls were brutally assaulted by a settler, with authorities failing to act and pursue the case. On June 29, 2023, a 35-year-old Juma woman was raped by 2 Bengali settlers during an Eid celebration, while another woman faced the same fate on October 29, 2023. In the realm of politics, the absence of Indigenous women in decision-making positions leave them voiceless and marginalized in their own land. These incidents highlight the urgent need to protect the rights of our Indigenous women and girls in Bangladesh. Therefore, I implore the Bangladesh government and the international community to heed the following recommendations. 1. Uphold General Recommendation Number 39 and ensure the rights and well-being of Indigenous women and girls in the CHT. 2. Being consistent in the inclusion of monitoring and reporting on human rights violations against these Indigenous women. 3. Exert international pressure on the Bangladesh government to fulfill its obligations. 4. Facilitate meaningful policy dialogues and consultation with our Indigenous Juma community. And 5th, advocate for regular visits, such as every 2 years, by the UN Special Rapporteur to assess the situation and advocate for our Indigenous women's rights. And 6th, demand rigorous scrutiny of the military human rights record before deploying them to the UN peacekeeping missions, given Bangladesh's significant contribution. How can we, with integrity, send more Bangladeshi troops as UN peacekeepers abroad, symbolizing hope and stability, while turning a blind eye to the injustices inflicted upon our own women at home by the very forces the UN deploys? General Recommendation Number 39 serves as a beacon of hope for Indigenous women, yet their rights are routinely invaded. Imagine the fear and despair felt by Indigenous mothers as they watched their homes burn, their daughters attacked, and their communities torn apart by conflict. In closing, we must demand answers, accountability, and action. Our women deserve peace both at home and abroad. Thank you.
I thank you for your statement. I now give the floor to Guatemala.
Gracias, señor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. General Recommendation 39 of CEDAW, Committee for the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, recognizes the multiple forms of violence and discrimination faced by Indigenous women and girls. In order to comply with this instrument, a participative approach must be taken to the prevention of violence. In this way, the cultural and linguistic rights can be respected, and we can promote the participation of women in decision-making through their empowerment. The Office for the Defence of Indigenous Women is the only governmental institution with a specific mandate for addressing Indigenous women's issues. It currently has 14 regional offices, and they fully address Indigenous women. This includes psychological, social, and legal support. Measures have been adopted to guarantee the right to self-identification. Currently, there are registers that bring together disaggregated data of Indigenous women, including sex, age, ethnic identity, and any disability. The office has two axes for its work. This enables the establishment of measures aimed at combating and preventing discrimination against Indigenous women. The first is prevention of gender-based violence and discrimination. The second area is comprehensively addressing cases of gender-based violence. For the prevention of gender-based violence, there is a training program for Indigenous women that includes themes such as the empowerment of Indigenous women, the right to living a life free of violence, full exercise of citizenship, and the legal framework for protection for human rights. This allows women to find out how they can call out cases and the different legal processes that they entail. Comprehensive coverage involves multidisciplinary services, including legal support, psychological and social intention, and treatment to promote emotional and social well-being at an individual and family level, and it also contributes to the re-establishment of the rights that have been violated. As the Office for the Defence of Indigenous Women, we will continue working to build a country where Indigenous women and girls can live in a context of respect and equality. I thank you.
I thank you for your statement. I now give the floor to Winneman-Wuntu tribe.
Distinguished representatives, Madam Chair, I honor the Lenape whose land we meet today. My name is India Reed Bowers, and I am speaking on behalf of the Winneman-Wuntu tribe as a member of the tribe's delegation as legal advocate to this 23rd Permanent Forum. The Winneman-Wuntu tribe is a non-federally recognized tribe or indigenous people still living in the tribe's traditional territory in what is currently called California in the United States. The Winneman-Wuntu tribe has survived genocide in many forms, and the matter of CEDAW General Recommendation 39 is pivotal to the Winneman-Wuntu. The tribe is matriarchal and matrilineal and has fought tirelessly to continue living and following Winnemem sacred traditional ways as both self-determining and for the continuation of future generations, ecosystems, and relations. These ways include traditional coming-of-age ceremonies for women, children, and girls, and ceremonies for the return of the sacred salmon. As well, the Winneman-Wuntu tribe works as self-determining and in ownership of its own knowledge and ways with agencies and experts, as indigenous traditional knowledge holders, while continuing to follow Winnemem traditional spiritual leadership. Last Friday morning, under Permanent Forum Agenda Item 4, the Winneman-Wuntu tribe announced its intervention speech made by Palm Michael Preston, the son of Chief Kayleen Sisk, the tribe's recognition and endorsement of UN CEDAW and CEDAW General Recommendation 39. This action and commitment is in line with both self-determination and responsibilities to human rights that the tribe puts forward as its own self-governing representative institution to the UN for the world and for the Winneman-Wuntu tribe and people. It is in this spirit of self-determination and self-governing that we put forward that all indigenous peoples, as self-governing, can also recognize and endorse UN human rights treaties and recommendations therein, and as such, join the global family of governances in upholding these rights and responsibilities alike. That such an action is self-determination and a means for a better world in our hands. Even if the settler states currently surrounding us have not signed or endorsed or implemented human rights treaties, such as CEDAW in the case of the United States, and thus its General Recommendation 39, and or other global human rights commitments, recommendations, and agreements, indigenous peoples can raise the bar of human rights, even when states do not, and even higher than states currently are or ever have been, as self-governing and self-determining. The Winnemem-Wintu tribe looks forward to working with the global community as leadership as its own representative institution with representatives of its choice in the form of the new status for Indigenous peoples underway at the United Nations via enhanced participation. Thank you.
I thank you for your statement. I now give the floor to the distinguished forum members. Dario Mujia.
Gracias.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The matter of independence is a crucial matter for this forum. It is heritage that has been built up across all parties. In particular, I wish to recognize the historic decision that states took when they founded this forum. But like all heritage, it must be cared for on a daily basis. Having been trialed for political issues or for participating in the defense of indigenous issues, no organization loses their status as an indigenous people just because of that. In addition, at the Permanent Forum, we are not a body here to judge or to pass value judgments on others. We are here to discuss our own issues. It's also important to recognize that states have agreed to adoption of the declaration, which includes the right to self-identification. It must be recalled that identity is a fundamental right. It can be exercised at an individual level, but also at a collective level. There is also the practice of solidarity that exists between peoples. This also is fundamental for the duration of the path, such as we are seeing today. Manifestations of these aspects should not be cause for reproaches to be aimed at one another. I would invite you to avoid falling into discussions that would undermine the deliberative nature of all aspects of the Permanent Forum. I'd also like to recall to participants here that as observers, we are very grateful to all of the contributions from observers, and we would like to maintain procedures that do not include the right of reply as per our tradition. We have all of our channels open to hear all observers, and this includes direct dialogue with member states as part of our program of work. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Gracias, Dario. I now call on Colombia.
Gracias.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for giving me the floor, Mr. Rapporteur. During your recent visit to Colombia, you held a candid and constructive dialogue with the Colombian state. You discussed both the progress that had been made as well as the challenges that persist. And it is of the utmost importance that we recognize the historic context surrounding some of the situations highlighted by the Special Rapporteur. We must also appreciate the efforts aimed at dealing with these questions in a constructive fashion. As regards the progress towards implementation of General Recommendation number 39, I'm pleased to announce that Colombia has formalized the withdrawal of the 3 declarations made under the optional protocol on the elimination of all forms of violence against women. CEDAW. This was ratified on the 23rd of January of 2017. In taking this step, we have ratified our commitment to the fundamental principles of the Convention, and we have shown our willingness to move forward in the protection of women's rights in our country. This step means that in grave situations established by the Convention, the Committee for the Elimination of all forms of discrimination against women can carry out investigations and emit relevant recommendations. And so the outcome of the investigations can be included in the periodic reports that the country presents in compliance with the Convention. In addition, the committee is able to receive and assess written communications from those who claim to be victims under the Convention. In cases where it is necessary, the committee can ask the state to adopt provisional measures in order to avoid harm that would be irreparable to the alleged victims, together with questions of admissibility. We have made meaningful steps towards guaranteeing the rights of indigenous women in our country, and this reflects our continuous commitment to gender equality and the protection of human rights. Thank you.
I thank you for your statement. I now give the floor to Consejo de Autoridades Indígenas de 48 cantones.
Uchukap katinimid arreri kashkol. El poder del pueblo.
The power of the people is in service. Brothers and sisters, representatives of the world's indigenous peoples, at the 23rd session of the United Nations Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues, the Board of Directors of the Council of Mayors of the 48 cantons of Totonicapán, Guatemala, is the oldest global representation, and we make the following declaration. In recent years, in Guatemala, as in other countries of the region, there has been a serious and worrying regression in democratic systems and the rule of law. This has threatened the freedom of citizens and human rights, which have significantly reduced the spaces and guarantees for free citizens' participation. Secondly, in Guatemala, the separation of powers and the independence of state bodies has been violated. A perverse coalition has been consolidated between the entities of the executive branch, the Congress, the Supreme Court of Justice, and the Constitutional Court, which protects officials who violate human rights and other civil servants linked to corruption. Thirdly, today there is voracious pillaging of natural resources, especially in indigenous territories. In the face of protest and resistance from indigenous communities, because of this deterioration and exploitation by transnational companies in collusion with unscrupulous judges, they've undertaken a system of persecution, imprisonment, murder, and forced disappearance of indigenous community leaders who oppose the dispossession of their lands. In this regression of democracy, the co-optation of the institutions of justice and corruption and impunity have caused the stagnation of development and increased the poverty rates of the majority of our communities, in addition to depleting our natural resources and territories. Having said the above, the Board of Directors of the Council of Mayors of the 48 cantons of Totonicapán, Guatemala, requests that the results of the 23rd Forum should not remain inside technical reports. Rather, they should become a binding instrument in order to sanction states that violate the guarantees of human rights of indigenous peoples. To the United Nations and the Organization of American States, it should establish and apply an independent mechanism to verify compliance with agreements, treaties, and conventions against corruption signed by the state of Guatemala, and they should publish their results. This is a mandate from our 48 organizations to defend liberty and freedom and the world.
I now give the floor to Philippines.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Distinguished Special Rapporteur, esteemed members of the Expert Mechanism on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, the Philippines recognizes the historic significance of General Recommendation number 39 in upholding and protecting the rights of indigenous women and girls. The Indigenous Peoples' Rights Act of 1997, or IPRA, exemplifies the Philippine government's commitment to ensuring the empowerment of indigenous women and girls. Through this vital legislation, the Philippine government ensures that indigenous women and girls are guaranteed their basic human rights and freedoms, which assures them of a fair and equal treatment, equal opportunities for employment, medical assistance, and other basic services. Moreover, the Philippine government is pleased to note our country's firm and steadfast commitment to protecting the rights of indigenous women and girls, pursuant to General Recommendation number 39, as exemplified by the representation of indigenous women and girls in policy-making bodies as guaranteed by the aforementioned IPRA law. We are proud to share that the chairperson of the National Commission on Indigenous Peoples, the main government agency with the mandate of protecting and promoting the interest and well-being of indigenous cultural communities, as well as 2 other commissioners, including this representation, are indigenous women. Republic Act 9710 of the Philippines Magna Carta of Women, which recognizes the marginalization of indigenous women and girls and the need to prioritize the improvement of their access to basic social and economic services. The Philippine government's sustained work towards gender mainstreaming that integrates gender considerations, including those of indigenous women and girls in the planning, execution, monitoring, and evaluation of government projects. Our Gender Equality and Women's Empowerment Plan for 2019 to 2025, which serves as the Philippine government's guide and key reference in formulating gender and development plans and budgets, includes in its key strategies the enhancement of the recognition of IP women's ownership and access to land and resources as an enabling factor in sustaining their and their communities' livelihoods. As the Philippine government drafts its 4th National Human Rights Action Plan, we assure the international community that we will employ inclusivity and ensure that indigenous peoples, particularly indigenous women and girls, are consulted. While the Philippines acknowledges challenges in implementing for IPs, our government is committed to continuous improvement through partnership and active engagement with indigenous communities. The Philippines remains open to the observations, recommendations, and support of the Special Rapporteur and expert mechanism as we strive to uphold and protect the rights of IPs in our country. Thank you.
Thank you for your statement. I now give the floor to Comunidad Campesino de Ocupata.
Gracias, estimado.
Thank you very much, esteemed members of the forum. Thank you to the Voluntary Fund for giving me the opportunity to be here. I am from the Quechua people called Ocupata, the land of the potato in the Andes of Peru. We, original women, are the creators of these potatoes that I have here. We are ensuring the survival of our people. We are sowing future in the land for those who will continue on our path. We continue raising our voice for those who are not visible in these spaces and that our own people render invisible. I'm here to pay homage to the memory of women who were sterilized, the women who were silenced in the protests of 2023, the curanderas, the guardians who have been killed and persecuted, like our cousin Maxima Cunha. Those of us who work the land have suffered not also climate change affecting our ability to produce food. We women are on the front line. We are the ones who care for the land and we feed the family. Without land, there is no life. There is no life. With justice, there are no human rights. And this is why I'm calling on you who address all of these issues. We call for states to not repress us any longer, to respect us and to respect our human rights and to abide by the measures of justice that are necessary to those who have suffered forced disappearance. We call for justice for the women who were killed during the protests. We need support to continue with projects that look after food sovereignty from a community level and from smallhold agriculture. We should have projects for indigenous women to allow us to continue working and caring for the land, for agriculture, and generating our own economic resources so that they come directly to women's organizations rather than through NGOs. Indigenous women have been hushed up for too long.
Thank you for your statement. I now call on the Special Rapporteurs on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, Mr. Kelly.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairperson. I just wanted to make some comments, probably as a response, but I don't want it to be here as a response of what some state and some indigenous organizations have to say. It's just a comment, general comments. But I think that is very important because when we are talking about indigenous peoples, we are talking about collectives that have their own culture, language, land, territories, worldview, and it doesn't matter if they are 400 or 1 million. They are indigenous peoples. They are not minorities. So I think that as an indigenous peoples, it is very important to know that indigenous people is not a constitute. The existence of indigenous people or the recognition of indigenous people is not a constitutive of rights. It is only a declarative as the right of the indigenous people are inherent, existing before the constitution of mother states. So indigenous people are before the states. So that's why the recognition is only that, recognition. Recognition doesn't give the rights. When we are talking about general recommendation, we are talking about the interpretation that the committees has on the spirit of the convention for the state to understand and to implement the convention, which makes binding the recommendation that doesn't need ratification and the state has the obligation to accomplish. About the question on guarantee participation in the legislative of indigenous people, in particular mobile indigenous people, there is not any research that can be applied to all. I think that it's a fundamental that the state respect the decision-making process of each indigenous peoples and their ancestral institution without interference. And the international instruments are important to raise awareness of existing human rights violations and to make a state accountable for human rights violations. So I invite all of you to use the existing human rights bodies, including the special procedures to report violation of indigenous peoples' rights. In the United Nations, we have 10 committees, almost 60 special procedures that indigenous people can use. So please, we have to learn how to use it, and we have to use it, those instruments that we have in the United Nations. So thank you very much, Madam Chairperson.
I thank you for your comment and clarifications. I now give the floor to Sun Hill Band of Indians.
Hello, Madam Chair.
Good afternoon, and good day and greetings to all sovereign chiefs, elders, and the many First Nations represented here on this day, Mother Earth Day, Day 11 win on our precious and precise Aztec calendar. I am Guadalupe Casas Acosta, Masatsin, Ogichi Danoden, First Coordinator of the International Council of First Nations, Ambassador to Mexico, and Cultural Attaché for Outreach and Repatriation of Antiquities and Artifacts of the Federation of Aboriginal Nations of the Americas, Ambassador to the Mexican States and Central America for the Polynesian Kingdom of Atui, International Delegate for the National and International Union of Mexican Human Rights Front by Jamil Laureano Luna, UNIFREX, a UN Messenger of Peace, and member of the International Advisory Board of the Krippner Institute and Center for Indigenous Studies. On behalf of the information organizations and of the San Hill Band of Indians, who I thank for this opportunity to speak here, the spiritual languages that were first recorded in the ancient painted books of our ancestors, today known as pre-Hispanic codices, were taken and are held without free and prior informed consent in the major capitals of the world with European names like the Borgia in the Vatican Apostolic Library, the Dresden in Germany, etc. Now we call on the UN Permanent Forum to follow up on these most important issues that are and recommendations that have been presented here. And we add to them, number one, that the UN Permanent Forum and all indigenous nations join to make 2024 the return of our sacred items. And number two, send another letter to Pope Francis Jorge Mario Bergoglio to inform him of our decision to begin the repatriation of the sacred codices of Mexico, beginning with the Codex Borgia, to be returned to Mexico on July 25, 2024, the day of the second zenith passage of the sun over the sacred city of Teotihuacan and the pyramid of the sun. Number three, advise the Holy See that they are in grave violation of UNDRIP of 2007. Number 4, advise the Holy See to comply with Article 11.2, to wit, states shall provide redress through effective mechanisms which may include restitution developed in conjunction with indigenous peoples with respect to their cultural, intellectual, religious, and spiritual property that were taken without free and prior consent, and to inform or against the violation of their laws and traditions and customs. Number 5, we call on this permanent forum to call for the immediate release of our grandfather, Leonard Peltier. Number 6, for the United Nations Permanent Forum and MRIP and my sisters and brothers here to join us, the International Council of First Nations, as we continue writing the Universal Declaration of Independence of Sovereign First Nations. Tlazokamati, Wemiak, muchas gracias, Mechicatiawi, Chicanomex, Masatsin, Azteco y Locali. Respect for indigenous rights is key to climate change. We still remember that we are one. Stop the desecration of Mauna Kea, Sacred Mountain, and free Leonard Peltier. Thank you very much.
I thank you for your statement. I now give the floor to Fundación para la Promoción del Conocimiento Indígenas.
Thank you, Chair, ladies and gentlemen. I am grateful to my ancestors, male and female, for assisting us in our struggle for years and for continuing to ensure that we maintain our identity. It was a lament offered to the Creator for the blood of our ancestors that has been spilled. Also, Kunadura women created a strategy to avoid being raped or sexually abused. When a rapist grabbed them, they would have poisoned sticks hidden and they would stab them with it until they died. In 1925, the colonial police wanted to civilize our people by so-called development, but my ancestors, male and female, resisted. The following year, the Konadule people is celebrating 100 years of the revolution. We are talking about a people that never kneeled to foreign invasions. I asked them, what are the new revolutions that we are going to have to push for, and especially given voices of women? I want to share with you some recommendations. We're calling on states to implement existing laws in order for indigenous girls to not be raped anywhere, in family, at school, or anywhere else. There should be dignified conditions for young indigenous people to have access to studies and to decent employment, and to have security so that they do not fall prey to traffickers and smugglers or mining companies across the Hamaya area. States should pay attention to political order, especially when it comes to implementation of General Recommendation 39 on the rights of indigenous women and girls. We call for rights of women and girls to be present, and for women and girls to be present in all spaces of food sovereignty, to land ownership for sexual reproduction, and more research on data on sexual abuse of indigenous women and girls. As my grandmothers used to sing, they used to sing the song of Mudang Pueng, and they called for a decent and full life for all women. Buen vivir, well living for all.
Todos los seres vivos.
Long live the Dule Revolution of 1925. Thank you.
Gracias. Now I give the floor to plurinational state of Bolivia.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you, Chair. Bolivia is grateful for the important report from the rapporteur. This allows us to identify progress that has been made as well as challenges that remain regarding implementation of General Recommendation 39 of CEDAW. We wish to highlight that this permanent forum has been constituted as a forum for dialogue between states and indigenous peoples. My country esteems that General Recommendation 39 is very important for the protection and promotion of indigenous women and girls. Its implementation represents a necessary step towards justice and equity. We are cognizant of the fact that indigenous women and girls are facing intersectional discrimination that is based not only on their gender, but also on their ethnic identity, their language, their socioeconomic status, and other factors. These facts mean that this issue should be addressed in a specific way without undermining the collective struggle. In many countries, women are ignored in decision-making processes, and their rights to land, to natural resources, and to self-determination are constantly jeopardized. Against this backdrop, we feel that it is a priority for member states to establish and strengthen the legal frameworks and public policies that protect Indigenous women and girls, including guarantees for their meaningful participation in decision-making and access to justice. It is also necessary that we have educational systems that reflect and address the cultural and linguistic diversity of Indigenous peoples. They should provide safe spaces and opportunities for the development of Indigenous women and girls. At a national level, we have made significant progress in my country in a number of different areas. The political participation of women, for instance, in Parliament represents more than 50% of them are Indigenous women. Also, when it comes to land ownership, we have registered more than 58,000 deeds that represents 54% of the total. I wish to conclude by recalling that today we are commemorating the International Earth Day, and the participation of Indigenous women in the preservation of Mother Earth is essential because we are independent. Mother Earth is our common home. I thank you.
Gracias. I now give the floor to the Indigenous Environmental Network.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I am Claire Charlo, a citizen of the Confederated Salish and Kootenai tribes. I work on behalf of the Indigenous Environmental Network. The Maastricht Principles on the Human Rights of Future Generations seek to clarify the present state of international law as it applies to the human rights of future generations. This report was published in July of 2023. The principles provide a progressive interpretation and development of existing human rights standards and laws in the context of human rights of future generations. The principle pinpoints that Indigenous children, youth, and women are the most impacted by climate crisis. Different studies have shown that women's bodies are more vulnerable to harmful effects of toxic pollutions, contamination with cyanide, arsenic, and the heavy metals created by extractive activities. There is increasing evidence that demonstrates the many ways in which women, as the bearers of life, are affected and can pass on more serious environmental health problems to future generations. The violence against Indigenous women, femmes, and Two-Spirit is also alarming. Ensuring our rights for both present and future generations is critical. An example of short-sighted projects that does not take future generations into consideration is climate false solutions, primarily designed to profiteer from the global ecological crisis. Most of these can be characterized as unproven techno-fixes, negative emission technologies, and carbon pricing mechanisms, carbon markets, and offsets. They claim to address the climate crisis while avoiding the very underlying drivers of fossil fuel extraction and large-scale agriculture. To put a price on the sky, on forests, on waters, on oceans, and soils, to create new derivative markets that increase inequality and expedite the destruction of all life is counterindicative of supporting human rights for future generations. Indigenous people, including sacred sites and traditional Indigenous knowledge, TIK, must be protected for future generations. Consistent with Indigenous prophecies and cosmovisions, a reawakening to our connection with nature by both Indigenous and non-Indigenous communities must happen. This inseparable relationship between humans and the earth must be respected for the sake of all life and future generations. Mother Earth is the source of life which needs to be protected, not a resource to be exploited and commodified as a natural capital or as an ecosystem service or as a nature-based solution.
I thank you for your statement. I now give the floor to Confederación Indígenas Bolivariano Amazonia and Human Rights Watch.
Gracias, señora presidenta.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Once again, I'm taking the floor here to make it clear that the situation of human rights violations and crimes against humanity that occur in Venezuela, in indigenous territory, as well as the siege threats and assassinations and murders are grave and occurring with greater frequently. Armed groups and state operators are involved. In some cases, they're not even investigators, even though these reports have been mentioned by the rapporteur of the UN. As I mentioned during my previous statements, at the moment, Venezuela is discussing a law against fascism that undermines the freedom of expression and opens a door for the persecution of human rights defenders in general. And this is why I'm calling on the Permanent Forum and the rapporteur to consider how serious this law is. Before I conclude, I want to call out two more things that are occurring in indigenous territories in Venezuela at the moment. And in the state of Tamacuro, which is part of the Venezuelan Amazon, on the 11th of April, 13 children aged between 6 and 11 years old died in strange circumstances. To date, this case has not been resolved. I also want to call out the critical situation that is occurring in Gran Sabana municipality between the state and indigenous peoples, justifying mining activities, and this is a breach of the right of self-determination of indigenous peoples as well as other fundamental rights. This is why I'm recommending to the Permanent Forum that you monitor the rights situation, especially humanitarian rights as indigenous people in Venezuela, and that we ensure that the right to self-determination is respected, but also the right to life. And we shouldn't be quiet about a persecution of indigenous leaders. Long life to the indigenous peoples of the world. Thank you, Chair.
Gracias. I thank you for your statement. I now give the floor to the First People Worldview, International Indigenous Women Forum, and ECMA, the joint statement.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My name is Rosalie Gonzales, and I address you on behalf of the Continental Network of Indigenous Women and the International Forum on Indigenous Women, FIMI. I want to focus on the progress and future of General Recommendation 39 on Indigenous women and girls. The adoption of GR 39 marks a significant moment, establishing critical principles and guidelines for safeguarding and empowering Indigenous women and girls globally. However, our task is not finished. Today, I want to highlight key areas where we must continue our efforts. Firstly, it's crucial to keep GR 39 on the international agenda. We urge the Permanent Forum and states to recommend for its annual review by the CEDAW Committee and to incorporate GR 39 into their state reviews. We call on the U.S. to adopt the CEDAW to ensure Indigenous women and girls' rights afforded in the GR 39 are also available to those in the U.S. Operationalizing GR 39 is essential for its effective implementation. Many stakeholders, including states and international organizations, lack the necessary knowledge to translate GR 39 into practical action. We must explore strategies to keep GR 39 at the forefront of discussions, preventing it from being sidelined among other resolutions. We recommend the Permanent Forum host an expert group meeting to review and strategize its implementation. We commend the Permanent Forum for its recommendation at last year's forum for UN Women to conduct and present a study by 2025 on the impacts of colonization on the rights of Indigenous women and girls, including within the context of the UN Women's Strategy for the Inclusion and Visibility of Indigenous Women in collaboration with other UN entities, and to identify critical action areas and strategies to advance the implementation of GR 39. We look forward to hearing of the status of the mentioned study from UN Women. We also recommend the recent adoption we also welcome the recent adoption of the General Assembly Resolution on Indigenous Peoples, which calls for the Commission on the Status of Women to include a priority theme on Indigenous women and girls. We call on the Permanent Forum to support this being implemented. Lastly, we urge the Permanent Forum to recommend to CSW to establish a permanent Indigenous platform to advance the implementation of GR 39 and ensure ongoing continued coordination for Indigenous women and girls issues. Thank you.
I thank you for your statement. I now call on Pruvek Dachlan.
Mi nombre es Shananin.
Hello, my name is Shananin. I am from the Inquiwa people of Mexico, a fragile tropical desert threatened by industrial livestock breeding and major meat producers, which is expanding as quickly as the displacement of ancestral food systems and our native plants and seeds. In the Mesoamerican cosmovision, humans are not made of flesh and bones, but roots. The milk part that makes us up, all of us, is a way of life. The ecological balance that ensures the vitality of our food crops and our traditional knowledge is today being threatened and damaged by extractive industries across the Americas. The expansion of business and industrial livestock breeding is undermining our right to food sovereignty. The development banks and the World Bank continue to invest millions of dollars of public funds in order to fund extractivist projects of industrial livestock breeding that do not feed anyone except the capital and major industry. This is why we are issuing a general call for development banks and the agencies of the United Nations to stop funding industrial livestock breeding and damaging the land, which is what follows. Rather, funding should go to plans to revitalize traditional food systems and agroecological systems led by Indigenous people. The well-being of communities and land should prevail over private speculation. The extractive industries and technologies that are used and their impact on water reserves is very damaging in a context of drought that is unprecedented in the Valley of Mexico. As we listen here about the pain and suffering of our brothers and sisters, clearly we must ensure that the institutions and banks are held to account for the impacts on our land, on our bodies, on our territories. Systematically and historically, we have been sacrificed for Western capitalism. Thank you.
I thank you for your statement. I now call on Native Youth Alliance.
Hello, my name is Nathan Phillips. I'm the Omaha tribe of Nebraska. I'm a Deer Clan. I was listening to everybody here today, and I have come to an understanding that our men are in desperate need of healing. You know, what we're doing to the women, you know, it's not how we used to be. The extraction industries and all of that, you know, come in and take away our manhoods, you know, and what we used to do and how we used to be, you know, that's been replaced with this new way. We got to figure out how to come back to our original instructions. Some time ago, the Yanomamos, they stood up against gold miners and they got murdered. And we went to the embassy in Washington, D.C. with a man named Corbin Harney. We were fighting the nuclear industry on his lands. And the embassy ambassador from Brazil, he told me, Mr. Phillips, you're going to wind up, if you keep doing this, you're going to wind up like your friend Leonard Peltier. He's been in prison now 47 years, and he's sick, and he's 79 years old, and he's been there 40-some years now, almost 40 years. They really don't know who committed the crime that he's in there for. And now his eyesight is really bad, and he's, like I say, he's 78, 79 years old, and he might die in there, and that would be death by incarceration, because the FBI, they admitted they don't know who did that. So they should let him go, and if there's any way that this forum could come together and write a letter in behalf of Leonard having a compassionate release from the penitentiary in Coleman, #1, or maybe it was #2, but Leonard Peltier should come home and be with his great-grandson and teach him songs, and what he has left of his life, he should live, back home. Leonard Peltier stood up for the people at that time, and because of circumstances, FBI's died, and that's why he's in the prison, But those FBI's today didn't have no business up there, So, anyway, peace and love, everybody.
Thank you so much for your statement. I now call on is Teaching Forest People program.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak today. I am Jacinta Rielen, a Wapchan youth representative from the South Ripon District Council. A shadow report was submitted by the SRDC to aid the CEDA's committee review of Guyana in 2019. Despite the government of Guyana ratification of the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, CEDA, and its incorporation into Guyana's constitution, Wapchan and other indigenous women in Guyana continue to face significant challenges to the realization of rights protected under CEDA. The main cause of discrimination against indigenous women and girls is the lack of implementation to our rights to self-determination. The gaps in Guyana's implementation of its obligation under international human rights law to protect the collective rights of indigenous peoples has led to women suffering due to the lack of national legal recognition of our rights to land, territories, and resources. Despite the fact that CEDA recommended that states support communities' efforts to disseminate information to enhance awareness of women's rights and the means to enforce these rights, the government of Guyana fails to provide adequate support to indigenous villages. The government's limited efforts to eliminate discrimination against women and girls do not reach our indigenous communities, and there is insufficient attention to the unique issues that indigenous women faces. We continue to experience blatant violations that are committed against our young indigenous women, which are fast becoming a norm. In most instances, reports to the relevant authorities are not adequately investigated. The state's failure to prosecute perpetrators of violations against our young women denies our access to justice. This makes indigenous women more vulnerable to continued assaults on our human rights, which reinforces prejudice, discrimination, and stereotypes. Our young women suffer from the psychological scars inflicted on our well-being, which remains with us throughout our lives, only to be relived by the horrors of flashbacks from time to time. Assaults on the bodies of our young indigenous women also attack our mental well-being, human dignity, and self-esteem. These violations are unjustifiable and outrageous, and we must collectively condemn them. In light of the continued challenges we face as women, especially indigenous women and girls, we call on the Permanent Forum to ensure that our Guyana engage with indigenous women in our communities and ensure.
I thank you for your statement. I call on Native American Journalists Association.
Congratulations, and thank you to the chair, and thank you to members of the Permanent Forum, delegates, and indigenous relatives. Bonjour. Greetings, my name is Christine Trudeau. I'm a citizen of the Prairie Band Potawatomi Nation and president of the Indigenous Journalists Association, formerly known as the Native American Journalists Association. I'm here to talk about why supporting Indigenous journalism by and for Indigenous peoples is a key driver towards self-determination. For the past 41 years, we have served to empower, support, and train future generations of Indigenous journalists. Globally, Indigenous communities are ignored, misrepresented, maligned, and in many cases, dehumanized by media portrayals of our cultures, distinct issues, and the challenges we faced due to the impacts of colonization. This is often because our communities are either not represented in newsrooms or do not have access to Indigenous-led media. Here in the United States, less than 0.5% of newsroom employees identify as Indigenous, and some of the country's most prestigious news organizations routinely stereotype or disregard tribal nations. To fully realize self-determination, we must ensure that our cultures are accurately represented in the coverage of our communities. Article 16 of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples states that Indigenous peoples have the right to establish their own media in their own languages and to have access to all forms of non-Indigenous media without discrimination. It goes on to invite states to take effective measures to ensure state-owned media duly reflect Indigenous cultural diversity. We call upon the members of the UN Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues to encourage states to legally recognize the rights of Indigenous media, to encourage states to fully fund Indigenous-owned media in perpetuity, to increase Indigenous news gathering and our forms of storytelling, including our Indigenous languages, so that we may develop our own media initiatives, and to encourage tribal governments to statutorily commit to transparency, as tribal outlets are the main source of information for citizens. While tribal media outlets have the experience and depth of understanding to provide nuanced coverage, they may not have the freedom or resources to fully report on issues that concern their audiences. We make these calls to the members to support Indigenous peoples' right to self-determination through Indigenous journalism. Jimagwech.
I thank you for your statement. I now give the floor to the Image for Inclusion.
Gracias, Madam Presidenta.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Mi nombre es Lidia.
My name is Lydia Garcia. I represent the organization Images for Inclusion. Chile is going through a number of challenges when it comes to the violation of the human rights of Indigenous peoples, mainly as a consequence of climate change and its devastating impact on health and food security. We are deeply concerned. Before this forum, Chile has asked what measures states should take given climate change in order to respect the collective rights of Indigenous peoples and ensure that the differential impact does not disproportionately affect them. The disproportionate effect of the climate emergency suffered by Indigenous peoples in Chile is directly linked to the lack of funding, direct funding, and the lack of an efficient consultation process that is inclusive and comprehensive, that includes the effective and meaningful participation in all issues affecting Indigenous peoples. Consultation is not the same as consent. Action and ability to act in light of what Indigenous peoples are suffering because of climate change and the intersectional forms of discrimination reveals the need for Chile to apply the right to free, open and informed consultation and in implementing General Recommendation number 39. And this is why we're calling on Chile to hear Indigenous peoples directly, so that they don't come to the next session with the same concern. Chile should eradicate discrimination and the systematic marginalization of Indigenous peoples. And this normalizes the precarious living conditions and political and other legislative measures are necessary for them to comply with their obligations so that Indigenous people can effectively use their own scientific and technical knowledge. we call for the Permanent Forum to urge the Chilean state to implement General Recommendation number 39 on the rights of indigenous women and girls, and especially that it guarantee that its laws and public policies linked to the environment and the impact of climate change, such as risk reduction and mitigation of loss and damages, should reflect the voice of indigenous peoples, and this includes indigenous girls and young people. Thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you for your statement. I now give the floor to Quechua Hatari. I will come back to you. I now give floor to Inuit Council of Nitasinam.
Gracias, señora
Thank you, Madam Chair. My name is Nilo Cayuqueo. I'm here representing the Mapuche people of Argentina. I would like to extend a warm greeting to you and to all of our brothers and sisters who are here. First, I want to say that I come from Argentina. And there are more than 40 indigenous peoples, according to the census of 2022. Many of us are in situations of extreme vulnerability, a violation of our rights, a despoilment of our territory. We are experiencing an extremely grave situation where our very existence as an indigenous people is threatened. With the arrival of Javier Milei last year, the situation of our peoples has gotten even worse. The dismantlement of the state is having a direct impact on the lives of indigenous peoples. There are territorial and development policies that are damaging the small-scale farmers and incentivizing the installation of major multinational companies on our territory, and they seek to exploit our natural resources. We are especially concerned by the request for derogation from a law approved by the Congress in 2006. This is an extremely important law that allows indigenous peoples to reject being dislodged or removed from their territories when there is a conflict with a state project. This proposal is also very worrying because it wants to take away those territories that haven't been recognized by the state, and there has been absolutely no progress in this land census. Furthermore, the state of Argentina wants to eliminate the National Institute of Indigenous Issues. There is a campaign to stigmatize indigenous peoples by state actors. This is aimed at delegitimizing our claims and our rights, and claims of false usurpers, foreigners, and so on and so forth. A specific forum on indigenous issues has been supplanted by other pro-government figures, one of them who was responsible for a genocide against the Mapuche people. This is further evidence of the serious backsliding in terms of human rights. Thank you.
Chua Hatari.
Quiero agradecer.
I would like to thank the Quechua Hatari organization. Have heard many expressions today, many people lamenting, and it seems to me that many of us do not know our own origins. We are suffering on our path of life, despite the fact that there are representatives, spokespersons of states here. You have invited us many times to be quiet, but this cannot be allowed to continue. Today, I want to say to you that the forced displacement and the persecutions of that are undermining our way of life in our communities have had very regrettable results. Many members of our people actually live here. We are the modern day slaves because our people did not have the opportunity to allow us to develop in a human sense, as should have been the case. Now all that remains is to say that we, to some extent, will continue to resist for our brothers and sisters, with our brothers and sisters, from our sensitive hearts and with solidarity of the brotherhood that is what defines us. We will continue to be the original peoples of the world.
I thank you for your statement. I now call on FSC Indigenous Foundation.
Muchas gracias, Presidente.
Thank you, Chair. A respectful greeting from the Indigenous Foundation, FSC. We're happy to have this opportunity to intervene at this 23rd session of the Permanent Forum of the United Nations on Indigenous Issues. We express our recognition of the vital contribution of women and children of indigenous communities to sustainable development and the promotion of self-determination. We also recognize that despite its critical importance, they often face many obstacles that impede their active and effective participation in decision-making. In order to overcome these obstacles, the Indigenous Foundation FSC has made a commitment to the following. Firstly, to facilitate the participation of women and young people from indigenous communities in governance processes and decision-making in order to guarantee that their voices light the way to true self-determination. Secondly, to promote the exchange of knowledge and development through a program of scholarships to train indigenous peoples in leadership and entrepreneurship for the global stage, to facilitate dialogue and to strengthen networks in order to set up projects in their territory in the areas of climate change, rights to land and indigenous economies. Thirdly, to integrate the scientific indigenous knowledge in global debates on climate change, on the conservation of biodiversity and sustainable development. We call on all stakeholders to go deeper in their commitment to integrating the rights of indigenous people, especially the rights to self-determination, as recognized in General Recommendation number 39 of indigenous women and girls in their policies and programs and practices. We say the rights of indigenous peoples must be recognized in order to ensure justice for historic crimes. Recognition is crucial for the conservation of biodiversity and the fight against climate change and making it a success. By way of conclusion, the Indigenous Foundation FSC reiterates its firm support for indigenous youth and the promotion of the right to self-determination. We call on all interested parties to join us in our crucial effort to forge a sustainable future that is just and equitable for all. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your statement. I give now the floor to the International Federation of Social Workers. I give the floor to Coordinación Antida de Organización Indígenas. I give the floor to Derecho Ambiente y Recursos.
Estimada,
Esteemed members of the forum, I'm representing a NGO from Peru as a member of ECOSOC. We participate together with Indigenous Amazon Organization, the Inter-Ethnic Peruvian Forest Organization. I would like to extend my thanks to our chair and to all members for giving us the opportunity to participate in this forum. I would like to refer to the challenges and proposals for implementation of Article 3 of UNDRIP, which states that Indigenous peoples have the right to self-determination and the right to determine their political condition and social, economic, and cultural development. The climate crisis is forcing us to find a new model for caring for the environment, amongst other things. It is therefore urgent that we protect indigenous territories as areas of high biodiversity where defenders come to resist in order to maintain life on this planet. In this line, we propose to the forum and they hold a sincere intercultural dialogue to strengthen the role of indigenous territories in the protection and preservation of biodiversity and the life of the planet. This dialogue should overcome the comparative exercise of who is doing what to conserve and how well they're doing. We must evaluate the current situation and current challenges. This dialogue is urgent. The point of no return has already been reached in the territories, and we must have systems for management and alliance networks to protect the rainforests of the Amazon and indigenous territories and the life of the planet. We should also push forward for a technical and political route that allows us to recognize and strengthen the initiatives of indigenous self-government in Peru and other areas of the Amazon basin. There are a number of initiatives for territorial control under the principle of ancestral territories, not small plots of land, but rather reconstruction of the whole territory. In Peru, this is called autonomous territorial governance, and in addition to being an alternative to control, it is a communitary rights holder and that is defending against illegal activities. Many of these topics have been addressed previously by the Forum and also by the Special Rapporteur in 2022, but we call for strengthening of the spaces for dialogue and action in addressing these topics, and a key call to states to implement and to respect these standards. It would be remiss of me that we regret the departure on Saturday the 20th of April, a defender of the territory and life in the South Amazon of Peru.
Colleagues, distinguished forum members, brothers and sisters, dear delegate, we have here the last speaker in the general discussion for this agenda item. Participants who could not take the floor due to the lack of time are again invited to submit electronic copy of the statement to the Secretariat through the email address statements@un.org. This email address is also posted in the wall in my left side. All statements submitted will be posted on the statement section of the journal as part of the record of this meeting. The forum will meet again in this conference room tomorrow morning, Tuesday, 23rd April at 10 a.m. to take up agenda item 6, future work of the Permanent Forum, including issues considered by the Economic and Social Council, the outcome document of the World Conference on Indigenous Peoples, and emerging issues. It will be a speaker list. I encourage all member states, UN agencies to subscribe through the e-delegate. And the indigenous peoples list is already subscribed at 5 a.m. At 5 p.m. You see, I'm tired. It's the end of the day. Understand me? So in this day, today is the World Earth Days. I wanted to send to all of you love and peace in the World Earth Day. And I wish you all a very good evening and see you tomorrow. The meeting is adjourned.